and welcome to today's edition of the HR Sound Off podcast show. My name is Julie Turney, and I am your host. How are you doing today? I hope you're having a great day wherever you are in the world listening to this show. And I want to take this opportunity to just say, continue to do all the great things that you're doing in HR. You're putting in the time, you're putting in the work, and even if no one else sees you, I see you, I hear you, keep going. So today we're going to be talking to my guest, Kevin Campbell. Kevin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Awesome. So Kevin, why don't you start off by telling everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm an employee experience scientist with Qualtrics, and I also have a very small coaching practice by the name of Lifted Leadership. And my role is essentially to help organizations and leaders identify gaps between where they want to be with regard to experiences and where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I do that through the use of employee listening, customer experience feedback, and organizational psychology. My background is as an organizational psychologist, and I also studied positive psychology under the co-founder of the field. So I take my experiences from working with lots of different organizations and my background in organizational psychology, and I use that to help workplaces and leaders improve the experiences of their customers and their employees.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Kevin. I appreciate it. Now, I think that's something very interesting that you just mentioned in terms of what you do, being an employee experience scientist. And that's something that might be quite fascinating, especially for our younger listeners. What does people experience science entail, and how did you pivot your career into that from organizational psychology?
Yeah, I think those two questions are really related. Employee experience science or people science is something that sits at the intersection of a couple of different fields related to
Mm-hmm.
human resources.
Yep.
So if you think about it like a Venn diagram, and of course the EX scientist is talking about Venn diagrams, right? But you think of a Venn diagram with three circles, right? You have people
Mm-hmm.
analytics,
Yep.
which is sort of like the HR data science.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have organizational psychology, which is more the domain expertise around
Mm-hmm.
how people operate at work. And then you have HR consulting or HR practice is that third
Right.
diagram. People science or employee experience science really sits at the intersection of those three things.
Mm-hmm.
So as an organizational psychologist knows about the theories and the research and understands why things relate to each other in a certain way and can tell you what's been done in the past around exploring this issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people analytics person can tell you, okay, these two things correlate, or here's how we use the data to get where we want to be, or have a
Mm-hmm.
deeper understanding. And then the HR practitioner / consultant knows the reality of what it takes to actually get
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
done. So people science sort of sits at the intersection of
In
those.
the intersection. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I always knew that I wanted to go into something related to this space when I decided to make the career pivot into organizational psychology. So I have two sort of HR origin stories. There's like the first one, and then there's the other one, right? So
Right. So give us both.
give you both. Okay,
Give
so
us both.
yeah, when I was about 10 years old, it was just, me, my mom was a single mom and my younger sister. And my mom had a really, really horrible experience at work. To make a very long story short, she crawled out of her job on her hands and knees, dripping in tears and sweat from just physical, psychological, and emotional exhaustion. And
Mm-hmm.
um, that led to a series of events that made it so that we lost our home. And a lot of that stemmed from her experiences at work.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me.
Right.
And it's a big part of the reason why I do what I do now, because I
Yeah.
believe that when we improve people's experiences at work, not only does it have a better outcome for the businesses and the leaders that run those businesses and are in charge of those workplaces, but it also leads to stronger families and stronger communities and a stronger society overall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't say I went into HR right away, though.
Right.
I grew up from very humble beginnings, so I wanted to make as much money as quickly as possible. So I ended up going into the subprime mortgage business of all places.
Okay.
And I was
Interesting.
making more money than I thought was even possible, but I was absolutely miserable. And when the market crashed, it was the best thing that ever happened to me because it gave me the opportunity to really ask myself, what do I want to do with my career?
Yeah.
And I took every psychological assessment available to try and answer that question. And the best one that was really, really in depth led me to the place of saying that I should either be a business consultant or a psychologist.
Mm.
And I had never even heard of organizational psychology. Probably couldn't have spelled
Prior to
organizational
that.
psychology.
Oh.
And I also read this book by this gentleman by the name of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, Hungarian-born psychologist, who was the first person to identify this idea of flow. And it's when you're completely absorbed in what you're doing because it's really challenging, but
Yeah.
you're also perfectly matched to the challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Athletes call it being in the zone.
Yeah.
Chess players experience it, right?
I
Yeah.
call it being in the pocket.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was the first person to really study this scientifically. And
Yeah.
and after that book, I was like, okay, I need to figure out what I can do as my next career to be able to experience that. And that's why I took all these assessments.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end of it, I was like, okay, business consultant, psychologist, maybe there's something that combines both. And I'm into this kind of positive psychology stuff because this Mihai Csikszentmihalyi person sort of is all about positive psychology. And it turns out there's only a couple of programs in the US that combine positive psychology and organizational psychology in business.
Mm.
And there was one that was about 45 minutes away from where I grew up, Claremont Graduate University. So I sent away for the brochure, and the brochure gets back to me, and the person that started that program was Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Mm.
So I took it as like some sort of sign from the divine.
Yeah.
Completely reoriented my career toward going in that direction, and I come to find out that most folks that don't stay in academia in organizational psychology either go into coaching or HR.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, well, I know nothing about HR.
Yeah.
I've been a salesperson for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can use my sales skills some way. And that's how I ended up in recruiting.
Yeah.
And I eventually became a recruiter for Google. And at Google, that's when I really realized, like, okay, here I am working at the best place to work according to all the workplace lists.
Yeah.
But I still see some people that are really, really happy and engaged in their job, and other people that only put in minimal effort and really don't want to be there. And I'm like, okay, it's not ping pong tables and massage chairs and free food that makes people happy at work. Yeah. What is it that really makes people happy at work? And that's what made me even more interested in going to school for organizational psychology. And I've been, spending the last 10 years of my career really answering that question and helping organizations kind of figure out what the business opportunity is as a result of answering that question, to say, like, what makes people truly happy at work?
Yeah.
And how can organizations become even more successful by figuring that out, what that is for their people and putting that into action. So
awesome. That's a really interesting origin story, or origin stories coming to the fore there that push you into where you are today. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that it's so important, and that's why I always ask that question, like, where did you get your start? Because I believe so many people have different ways of expressing how they got into HR or how they got into people experience. And some of it's lived situations that, cause them to want to pivot and say, I don't want to be in this space, or I don't want this to happen to me. Or I'd like other employees to be able to have good experiences. That's kind of like why I got into HR as well. So I really do appreciate you sharing that with us. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, employee experience science. how does it work? So the first time I heard about people science was through my exposure to a company called Culture Amp, which I think you're familiar with. And that was where I first got my baptism into people science and what it's all about and how it works with surveys through the services that they've created. And so tell me a little bit about how you go about going into organizations and really discovering what it is that makes people happy at work.
Yeah, I think it really starts with questions.
Yeah.
There's so much data out there,
Mm-hmm.
and having answers, there's almost too many answers. Answers are in abundance.
Yeah.
So it really starts with, what do you want to know about your people? And maybe there's even a step before that that says, where do you want to go with your organization? What kind of
Mm-hmm.
company do you want to be?
Mm-hmm.
What's the purpose that you're trying to fulfill in the world?
Yeah.
Because once you have those aspirations clearly in mind, you can start to think about, how do our people help us address those aspirations, and what do I need to know about our people in order to be able to make those aspirations
Mm-hmm.
reality. So, it can
Yeah.
be as simple as, hey, we're a quick service restaurant with 3,500 locations now, and we want to double that to 7,000 within the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, you're going to need a lot more people for that.
Yeah.
So people science will answer the question of, okay, well, how do you attract people to your organization? What
Yeah.
keeps people at your organization?
Mm-hmm.
What are going to be the challenges associated with that? This is a real world example. Quick service restaurant that wanted to go from 3,500 people, excuse me, 3,500 locations to 7,000 locations in a few years. Only 50% of their store managers felt completely prepared to take on the
Mm.
role they were in.
Wow.
And that's with just the current 3,500 stores that they had, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So people science begins with really, the scientific method of,
Mm-hmm.
what do you want to know, or what do you think you
You
know
want to know.
that you
Mm.
want to put the
Mm.
test, right?
Yeah.
That's another big one.
Yeah.
What are another great example is, I was working with a cybersecurity company in the Bay Area in 2021, and they noticed that they had above average attrition
Mm-hmm.
from their traditionally underrepresented groups, but those groups on their engagement survey had a higher engagement score than other folks. So it's like,
Mm.
okay, well, why are people leaving at a higher rate if
Yeah.
they're not engaged in their work, right? So it's a great
Right.
question to find out, like, why is there
Mm-hmm.
this mismatch?
Yeah.
And what they found was, well, first of all, they were looking at traditionally underrepresented people the wrong way, because they were thinking of it as just that, when it's
Mm-hmm.
like the experience of um, one particular group is going to be completely different than the experience of it. So you can't mash people together in that way and be
Right.
able
Right.
to draw something. But then when you looked at the reasons that people were leaving, it was for things like caring for family members,
Mm.
career change.
Yeah.
So things that were completely outside of, I didn't like
Their
my boss,
control.
or I didn't like my work. So
Yeah.
there was really
Yeah.
a difference, right? So I think it really starts from a place of curiosity. And
Mm-hmm.
what do you want to know? The same way that it does in org psych, the same way that it does in academia to some degree,
Yeah.
but through the lens of, how can
Mm-hmm.
this help us get where we want to go, and to be
Mm-hmm.
able to answer those questions, and then be able to track that progress over time.
Yeah. I really feel like that's so interesting. And I gotta ask you, how do you get HR professionals to get excited about this kind of stuff? And not just HR, but also leaders, because I think that it's very important information. It really will help HR people to be able to connect the dots, to help their leaders create great organizations, create great experiences for the people in their organizations. But I find a lot of times, because HR may be so caught up in the day to day, the surface stuff, right? The admin, the payroll and all those kind of things, that they don't get really down into the bottom of that iceberg where all that fun stuff sits. How do we get them excited about that, Kevin?
Great question. I don't think we all have the answer to that, but I think I have a couple of ideas. And
Yeah.
I think there's a few. The people that are really interested in this type of work tend to be two types of personas that I see. And they
Mm-hmm.
are what I would call business-minded HR professionals. So
Yeah.
people that want to be able to make the case because they know it's already out there. They just need to demonstrate it to say like, hey,
Yeah.
the work I
Exactly.
do
Exactly.
matters. The work I do has a connection to customer outcomes or business outcomes. And
Mm-hmm.
I need to be able to make that case with data and with numbers. Uh,
Yeah.
so that's one way of driving that excitement, right? Is like finding that for people that
Mm-hmm.
are of that mindset. Another persona is what I would call culture oriented business professionals, right?
Yeah.
So people that are not necessarily in HR, maybe they're in marketing or sales or another part of the
The
organization.
business. Mm-hmm.
They understand that the only way they're going to be able to meet their goals is with and through the culture and the people. So I
Yes.
think when those two personas can get together, when they can find each other within an organization,
Mm-hmm.
magic can happen.
Mm.
So I think so I think it's like, how do you get your head above the day to day and into the excitement? And I
Exactly.
think part of it is if you are excited about it, it'll become more top of mind and
Yeah.
you'll start to see those things. It's like, when you buy a new car or you start to look at a particular type of car and you
Mm-hmm.
never noticed how many of those cars were on the road until you
Yeah.
started looking
Until
at
you start looking for it. It happens all the time.
it.
That happens all the time to me.
So I think that's part of it. And then, I think another part of it is creating that experience mindset, right? When we think about all
Mm.
those operational things, a lot of times we focus on the outputs and not necessarily the outcomes.
Yeah.
Like how many people signed up for benefits, how many people were onboarded, how many people went through the program. Um, but what's the real experience that you want people to have as a result
Yes.
of that, right? Like you want
Mm-hmm.
people to exit the onboarding feeling like, oh, I made the right choice to be here. Oh, this is
Yes.
a place where I'll have friends in a future and be able to belong, right? So, are we measuring just the numbers, or are we measuring? Are we putting numbers around the experience?
Experience. Which makes a big difference, huh?
Oh,
Because then
absolutely.
that's how you are able to make products and services better. It's how you're
Yeah,
able to become more agile and you yourself become a more scientist, right? Because through experimentation then you're able to see what works and what doesn't work by measuring the experience, right?
that's right. Yeah, and it takes a bit of vulnerability, right, to say like,
Yes.
I want you to let me know how I'm doing, where I can improve, what I'm doing well,
Yeah.
and lowering the guard around what comes in and thinking about it from a scientific perspective really helps
Mm-hmm.
with that, to say like,
Mm-hmm.
this isn't feedback on me, although it is.
Yeah.
It's information that I can use to improve.
Use, improve, make
Yeah,
something better.
yeah.
Yeah. Don't take it so personal.
It's easier said than done,
I
right?
know. I know. Do you know, it's so funny? I always remember this saying, this expression that Dr. Rick Rigsby gave in a graduation ceremony talk that he gave. And he said, ego is the anesthesia that deadens the pain of stupidity.
Mm,
And that stuck with me. Ego is the anesthesia that deadens the pain of stupidity. So, do I want to be stupid? Do I want to let my ego get in the way of me making good stuff from the people I serve? No, I don't. So then let me step aside and say to myself, okay, I don't want to take this personal. I'm trying to create a good experience or a great experience for you. In order for that to happen, I need to get your feedback on what we're doing so far, what's working, what's not working, so that we can create a better experience. So we can either enhance it or dial it back if it's too much. But I don't think employees ever say something's too much. you know,
Yeah. Yeah. No,
But
it's interesting because the scalpel and anesthetic analogy I've used in a different context, or a different. It's very similar saying, and it's
uh-huh.
grace is the anesthetic for the scalpel of truth.
Mm,
And or another way of putting at it is like, a strengths orientation is the anesthetic for hard feedback, right? So if you know that this information is not going to be used against you,
right.
only for improvement,
Mm-hmm.
then you can let it in, right? You
Yeah.
can start to do that open heart surgery,
Yes.
to really make those changes, cut out the cancer, sometimes. But sometimes it's not about, and I think that's another mindset shift. It's not always about solving problems. So a lot of this work I've done with branches,
Yeah.
and just amazing experience scores from this one bank branch manager that I was coaching. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and that's an interesting thing because in that work, I was coaching every manager, not just the low performing ones, but also the high performing ones,
Right.
right? Because that was just an opportunity for them to say, like, how do I go from good to great?
Yes.
And that's exactly what this person said. I said, you have amazing scores. I'd love to learn a little bit about what you're doing so I could share it with other managers. And he says, I don't just break bad habits, I break good habits too.
Yeah.
So if I see
Mm,
that one of my employees walks the customer out to the door and the customer likes that, why not take the extra step and walk them to the car,
mm,
right? If you notice that your customers react really, really well when you remember their name, why
mm-hmm.
not turn it into a game so that all of your tellers and all of your employees try to remember every single person's name, right? And
Wow.
if we think about that through the employee experience, it's not always about creating situations where people don't burn out and they're crawling out on their hands and knees.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, we
Yeah.
don't want to have that, but like, how can you get it so that people that are already doing okay,
Mm-hmm.
doing great, right?
Yes.
And I think that mindset makes people open to improvement even more because you're saying you're
Mm-hmm.
whole, you're good enough, just where you are, like you're doing everything fine. So this
Yeah.
isn't about making you go from bad to good. It's like you're already good, but you can be
How
so
can I
much more.
make you
This
great?
experience can be so
Yes.
much more.
The
Yeah.
potential is there for greatness. Let's explore that.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that a lot. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I hope that it makes people think a little bit differently about how they can move from good to great because there's so much potential in our space to help create better experiences in the organization. What would you say would be like your top tips for organizations on how they can enhance their people experience?
So I like to think about it in terms of ABC 1, 2, 3. Recently, just published a blog article on the XM Institute. Highly recommend you
Mm-hmm.
check it out. But it's uh, thinking about everything with the end in mind, and being
Right.
radically simple and action oriented. So
Mm-hmm.
A is action oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So when you want to improve people experience, you want to approach improving people experience. Don't think about this as a data analytics project or a research project. Although you're going to use some of those tools, think about it as an action orientation. What do you want to
Right.
actually do at the end of this understanding?
Mm-hmm.
The next piece is B, make it business relevant, right? You have to make it business relevant. You know, I'm I'm motivated by improving people's lives at work, and I know that in order to sustain that over the long haul, we have to get people excited about it from a business perspective.
Yes.
So, what connection can we make
Mm-hmm.
back to the business, right? If we're
Right.
improving the onboarding experience, as an example, if we can shorten somebody's time to ramp, that's going to have a huge impact on business outcomes.
Yes.
If we can turn around retention, if we can make it so that people aren't calling out sick because they have better well-being, whatever it happens to be, what's
Mm-hmm.
the connection? And then C, conversation based,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of times people will get the answers, they'll get the data, and then the manager or the leaders or HR, well intentioned, will meet among themselves or meet by themselves with the data and
Yeah.
hatch a plan based upon what they think the plan should be. When
Mm-hmm.
it's often much more effective to start with a conversation with the people that gave you the data and roll
Yes.
in what the solution is going to be. So action
Mm-hmm.
oriented, business relevant, conversation focused, conversation based.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to taking action, um, the communication around that should be as simple
Mm-hmm.
as one, two, three, right? So don't try and boil the ocean.
Right.
Pick one area to focus on. So one, do one or two things about it, and then communicate what you've done three times, at least three times, through three different channels, right?
Yes.
Because a lot of times, and this is so true for HR, right? Like HR will make improvements or do things based upon feedback from their stakeholders or from the people, and
Mm-hmm.
then they won't always make that connection back to, hey, we actually did this because
Did
of what
this.
you said, right? Like
Yes.
you said
Exactly.
X, therefore we did Y, and not
Mm-hmm.
just say it once through an email,
Right.
but do it through Slack, do it through team meetings, do it through,
Yes.
posters in the hallway, right? At least three different mediums, at least three times. Because look, learning and development professionals tell us this all the time. If you could tell people something once and they remember it, they'd all be out of a job. I think
Exactly.
the same thing is true for
Exactly.
all of us, right?
Exactly. Repetition for emphasis is everything.
So yeah, I mean, I think those are the that's like those are the tips. ABC 1, 2, 3. I think that's the
Yes.
takeaway when
I
it comes
love
to.
those. Thank you so much for sharing them. Tell us, what are you reading, watching, listening to right now that you think our audience would enjoy?
So I'm listening to an audiobook, and I always end up doing this. I listen to the audiobook and then I end up buying the physical book because just having both.
Mm-hmm.
But Upstream by Dan Heath, uh,
Mm.
and it's all about how do you, rather than solving problems where you see the problem, how do you get upstream
Mm-hmm.
to be able to fix that problem at the origin, right?
Right.
Um, if you have a turnover problem, a lot of times people say, okay, well, we need to do exit surveys to find out why people are leaving. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a good answer, but it's not the whole answer,
No.
because really what you want to look at is those people that left. What were they telling you 6 months ago? What were they telling you a year
Yes.
ago? What was their
Yeah.
onboarding experience like? And being able
Mm-hmm.
to draw those things together. So Upstream is all about that, examples from business and government and social programs. And
Mm-hmm.
it's fascinating to think about how
Nice.
to get into the upstream solutions for downstream problems.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Older Kevin speaking to younger Kevin. What advice would you give yourself about your career?
You know, I thought about this because I saw that you were going to ask this, and when my daughter was born, and she's 9 months old uh, as of last Friday, I said to my wife, I was like, I can never regret anything that's ever happened in the past up until today, because if anything had changed, I might not have my daughter.
Yeah.
so, so I'd be reluctant to give any advice, to be honest, because I don't know how I would influence myself. All the mistakes I made kind of led me here.
Yes.
So so I think maybe that's the thing that I would say, is that, like,
Yeah.
it's not about getting things right, but it's about learning from everything, and just,
Yes.
maybe doubling down on that learning orientation rather than getting what you want. It's just as important to learn about all
Mm-hmm.
the things that are there to learn about along the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe that's what I would tell younger Kevin.
Oh, that's sweet. Thank you for sharing that. So, here's a big question. What's the biggest misconception about HR that really bothers you that you want to set the record straight on right here, right now?
I think I almost made this misconception, and I think it's the use of language around
Mm-hmm.
HR, and I see this coming both from other parts of the business as well as HR itself,
Mm-hmm.
and it's referring to other parts of the business as the business, right?
Mm.
How are we going to get this out
Mm.
to the business, right? It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. HR is just as
Is
much part of the
in the
business,
business.
more than
Yep.
some departments, right? And I think it's that mindset shift that's the misconception. It is that no, we are the business, right?
Yes.
And I think it's also for people, it's interesting, even within HR. and I've been guilty of this in the past. It's like, oh no, I'm organizational development. Oh, I'm learning. I'm this, right? It's like,
Yeah.
no, we're all in this together.
Correct.
And the more that we can elevate, whether we call it people or HR or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the nomenclature of the moment
Mm-hmm.
happens to be, it's like, no, we really, this is the profession that we want to elevate.
Yes. Yeah.
And we are the business. So, yeah.
Nice. I love that. I've never had anyone say that before. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Definitely important. We are the business. So nothing about getting to the business. We are the business. I love it. I love it. So what's next for Kevin Campbell?
I think having more conversations like this, I love doing work with organizations, and I think I always want to have that, and to keep
Mm-hmm.
myself honest. But I think the multiplier for really improving things overall is going to
Yeah.
be not just helping this organization, helping this person, but how do we collect the learnings across organizations and amplify and spread that message. So
Yes.
I want to continue doing the work that I'm doing and take every opportunity I can to make sure that I'm almost working myself out of a job,
Mm-hmm.
because the more that we can spread this knowledge and information,
Yeah, the better.
the less there will be a need for
Yeah,
folks like myself.
I got
Um,
it.
yeah, so that's what's next.
Nice. Awesome. I like that. Well, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your insights and knowledge and giving us your time and your energy. I hope that more people will look at this field and see it as something intriguing to explore. I know a lot of times when people think about HR, they just think about the core things that they know about HR, but there's so much more and there's so much um, more exciting things to do in our space if you just take time to explore it, to discover it a little bit more. So, thank you for coming and sharing your journey as a people experience scientist with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
Here we go.